Okay, good afternoon, everybody. We are live. Got a couple of you watching now. And welcome to the January 2023 camera Q&A, live Q&A. I try to do these once per month, and it's really just to respond to some of the comments and questions that have been left on the channel over the previous month. Sometimes they're questions that are really good questions, and so, they're kind of worthy instead of having a drawn out response in text form on the YouTube platform by way of a comment, uh, have it be more of a discussion and present maybe if I have some more engaging thoughts on it, to bring that forward. So let's see who I've got with me so far. Carlos Quintero, yo, how are you doing? And let's see, he says, did you pick up a Polaroid yet? So those of you who don't know, in Carlos Quintero's one of his recent live streams, it is about how he has switched to red from Canon. And I just, being a smart aleck, typed in, I'm going to switch to Polaroid. And he called me out on it. And he says, okay, you switch to Polaroid, and I'm going to see if you can shoot a real estate interiors job with a Polaroid. And that really got me to thinking. It's like, how could you even do that? Because a Polaroid, I'm not sure, and somebody can correct me if I'm way off base here. If you're a Polaroid pro, I don't think a Polaroid has any settings you can modify, does it? I mean, I think it's just a button that you snap, and I don't know if it's focusing or if it has like some insane depth of field anyway, because it's a little tiny pinner sensor with like a f32 aperture, which is just a hole in it, so it's not an adjustable aperture. I don't know if you can adjust shutter speed. I don't know how it meters. I'm assuming it meters, and that's how it knows whether to fire that little puny flash or not. But so he and I afterwards, we got to texting back and forth, and we said, how would you even do this? Like, first you'd have to figure out what a Polaroid is even doing, right? So if you don't have an adjustable aperture on a Polaroid, what about is the aperture? And then does it have shutter speed that varies? Or is it just like set on some vanilla exposure and then it augments it with that little tiny tube flash bulb on the front of it or not? So, Carlos, to answer your question, no, I don't have a Polaroid yet. I am still somewhat curious. Do you have yours coming? If you have yours coming, I'm going to have to pick one up. I can't make any guarantees that I might not take it apart, though, just to try to figure out what it does. So when he was looking at Polaroids too on the Best Buy website, it's just the most measly set of specs that you could ever imagine. So it says like autofocus, yes, and it doesn't tell you anything else, about how this thing works. So if there are any Polaroid experts, let me know. So Hobo Shogun, good afternoon to you. So that's a cool name, actually. I like Hobo Shogun. So let me get into to a couple comments on the channel here that has just come in. So Yen7280 commented on the last live stream that we did. I started with a Nikon back in 2012. We were talking about Nikon and how the D850 is perhaps a good indicator of Nikon's poor R&D department. Not because the D8 or not the D850, the Z8, the new one they did. Not because the Z8's a poor camera, the Z8's a fantastic camera, but because they'd taken 2 years and instead of innovating something off of the Z9 and trickling that tech down, which is something that Canon and Sony do pretty much every time they release something, they took 2 years to strip down a Z9 into a lower price point, which is the Z8. So that's the context of where this comment is coming from. So Jens says, I started with Nikon back in 2012. They came out with the D600, loved it. One of the first 26 megapixel camera F mounts, had tons of lenses to choose from, and never had an issue with their oil says probably old sensor image. Then in 2017, I picked up a Sony A6500. That little camera can shoot 11 frames per second. Autofocus was great. That's when I knew mirrorless was the future. Sony figured out the ingredients to make the mirrorless platform work. Now I have the Sony A74 for the same reasons I had the Nikon D600 back in 2012. Sony has tons of lens options with third parties, and I like their tech. Yeah, Sony, and I often say this, I think that the A7 III was the most transformative, most important camera in the past decade or so. And that's really because of that. Everybody was shooting DSLRs really before the A7 III came about. And yes, Sony had some older mirrorless offerings from the A7 III, but they weren't any good, with the exception of the A9, which was a very expensive camera without any native long glass. The battery life was poor. The heat problems were rampant, and you had Lumix, Panasonic, who was doing very video focused APS-C size mirrorless cameras. I think Olympus was doing that kind of thing as well. But nobody was really making mirrorless cameras. The EVFs were bad. That's another thing. So there were a lot of reasons why not to have a mirrorless camera over DSLRs. But the A7 III really changed that, because now the battery life is good. It's a full frame sensor with a huge amount of dynamic range. I still love the A7 III sensor. The autofocus was good. You know, it was truly a baby A9, and for $2,000, you had to look really long and hard all of a sudden at why would I spend even more money? Because at that time, these cameras were more money for a 5D Mark III or 5D Mark IV for a Nikon D850. You know, why would I spend even more money for these types of cameras when I could go mirrorless? I can use the live exposure through the EVF as a tool. Okay, and it's not necessarily that a mirrorless camera takes a better image than a DSLR, because that's not true. But you know, the real value of a mirrorless camera is you don't have to chimp, right? So those of you who've been around since before mirrorless, chimp is when you kind of guess at your exposure, you take a shot, and then you look at it, and then you chimp your settings down or up to whatever. You take a shot, you look at it. So you don't have to do that with a mirrorless. Now, the EVF was good enough in the A7 III, and it was certainly good enough in the A7R3. A7R, and I had both those cameras at the same time, back when they were newer on the market. And the A7R3 is a better camera than the A7 III. You don't hear so much about it though, because the A7 III was the real market shifting camera because of its price point, because it was $2,000. So, yeah, no, I get it. I mean, as far as the lens thing goes, that's actually why. Okay, so the Sony versus Canon thing, right? And I've made a lot of videos recently, and those of you who've been around the channel know that I shot Sony primarily for many years until I just recently switched over to shooting primarily Canon. And so I went to a pair of R5Cs from several Sony bodies. And the main reason why I did that has to do with lenses. And it's not that Sony lenses are bad, because they aren't. They're beautiful. And it's not that I don't find attractive the availability of all the third-party options to Sony, because that's attractive too. It's that I enjoy, first off, I think the RF lenses are fantastic, from Canon. I think they are absolutely gorgeous. And I appreciate how so many of the RF lenses, RF zooms, even the wide angle ones, are optically stabilized. And in fairness, that could be because Canon has never figured out how to do sensor stabilization as good as Sony has, especially when it's pertained to the wide angle thing. Everybody knows about the wide angle wobbles. Even in the R3 on the latest firmware, there's the wide angle wobbles, right? But I like how these lenses, so many of them are optically stabilized. And so I'm somebody who does primarily high quality stills photography in the real estate and interiors type of space. But then I also do a lot of video. And so the R5C, to me, having a sensor that's pinned so it doesn't have IBIS, so I don't have to worry about IBIS anomalies there, but having the lens be stabilized. And so I typically will use the 1535 2.8 RF, and it's optically stabilized, and it works really, really nicely. And on full frame, 15 gets me wide enough that I can then also punch in a little bit with the electronic stabilization on the R5C, which I also think works very, very well. And that's a great comment. That to me is a better combination than anything that I had figured out with the Sony. So so it's actually because of the lenses that I went over to Canon. Now I get the whole argument about there not being third-party options with Canon. You know, it has to do with Canon enforcing their patent and so forth. It's a whole divisive thing that I'm not really going to go into. I have gone into it, so if you're curious about what my thoughts are on it, you can go back and take a look at one of my other videos. But really, the fact of it is, Canon's RF lineup is robust enough for what I do, that there are lens options for everything that I do within it. And since I'm out using these tools for work, um, these are business expenses to me, so I can afford to get the first party L glass, and it's beautiful glass. So that's just kind of where I'm at. And I like shooting on the red Komodo. I don't currently have one. I sold my red Komodo a few months ago. Just wasn't using it a lot. Might pick up another one. Might pick up a Komodo-X. But if I do, if and when I do, I'm going to have RF mount be native on that too. So it really decreases my loadout, not being kind of half in two systems like I was when I was shooting Sony and also Red. It's maybe $11 answer to whoever's question that is. Hobo Shogun, speaking of Lumix, what do you think about the S5 II? I think it's fantastic. I think probably the best feature of that is Open Gate. And I'm kind of surprised that, if I'm not mistaken, I think the S5 II has Open Gate. It seems like the new Panasonic cameras have Open Gate, and the new Fuji cameras are doing Open Gate now too. So those of you who don't know what Open Gate is, so if you take a look at the stream that I'm doing now, I'm shooting it horizontally, right? It's a 16 by 9. Let me get kind of my bounds like this. So Open Gate is basically, okay, this only represents, say, like 90% of the sensor on this Canon C200 that I'm shooting on. So there are other parts of the sensor that are taller, right? So stills photography cameras are typically 3.2 sensors, and they're taller. So it's kind of more of it's still a rectangle, but it's a taller rectangle than typically the 16 by 9 or DCI that these cameras will shoot. So Open Gate will allow you to capture from the entire sensor. So it'll allow you to capture the taller aspect too, and wide. So why that is valuable, why that's especially valuable, is it's easy to create many forms of content in the edit without losing too much resolution, right? So you can shoot vertical, you can shoot horizontal, and you don't lose a lot of resolution doing either, because you're framing for both, having that taller aspect ratio in the capture. So that's Open Gate in its essence, and it's something that makes a lot of sense. And so I don't know why more companies aren't doing that. So, like, for instance, one of the other things that and Josh Satin and Carlos, you and I, and some other people often talk about this, the Canon cinema cameras and a couple of the Sony ones too, the FX6 and FX9, all have face only autofocus, right? So I'm shooting right now on the C200 as face only autofocus. It'll stay on my face, and if it does not see my face, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't jump to the background, it doesn't jump to the foreground, right? I can put my hand out, it won't focus on my hand because it's not a face. It'll just stop, and then it'll focus on my face. So, and it seems like such an easy thing to implement versus like the bug lizard eyeball focus and and all those things, right? That the arms race with autofocus is currently featuring. So, things like that. Open Gate, face only autofocus. I don't know why more cameras don't do that. I know with I'm sure with Canon, because they're like the poster child of this kind of behavior. They do it to differentiate the cinema line versus the stills line. So the C200 I'm shooting on does a face only autofocus. The R5C that I have does face only autofocus, but like the OG R5 doesn't do it. I don't think the R3 does it because that's a stills camera. It's a Canon, even though it's a $6,000 or whatever it is now, stills camera. So um, I don't know. I think more cameras should have that because it's incredibly useful for talking heads. And so not only YouTube content, but doing commercial work and things like that. Scotty V, good to see you, bud. Canon in red is a nice marriage with killer RF glass. Yeah, you don't need to mix it up any more than that, in my honest opinion. I absolutely agree. And it took me a while, and this is why, because Sony does have, for what I do on the daily, probably the best single camera for that in the Alpha 1. And there are a lot of reasons why. Um, I'll give you a couple. The Alpha 1, you don't have to twiddle with the focus settings for it to just work. So when I'm doing interiors, I'm often locked off on a tripod anyway. But then if I'll go outside to do exteriors and I'm on like an aperture priority, with the A1, I can put a tracking box on whatever and it just sticks. It just sticks and it just works. So with the R5 series cameras, with the R5Cs that I have, with the R5 that I used to have, it's not as sticky. It's kind of a little bit more jumpy. Now you can set up the focusing system with the Canon cameras a little bit. You can set them up to be more kind of tailored for your use case. And so they have the different cases, and they have increased sensitivity settings really than the Sonys do. So you can get more into the nitty gritty of it, but they just don't stick as good as, especially like the A1. And the second reason, like I've said often, is the 1/400th of a second maximum flash sync speed that the Alpha 1 does. And so there's no other camera that does that other than some medium format ones with leaf shutter systems. And so as a daily driver though, right? So the A1 for real estate with the 16 to 35 G Master as the workhorse lens on it, it really solves a lot of pain points and you can work really quickly with it. So even though I was shooting red and I had the I had been collecting an RF lens collection to shoot on the red, and I really enjoy the lenses. They're fantastic lenses. I never could find a way to work as quickly and as confidently in my daily workflow stuff with the Canon cameras as I could the Sony cameras. And so if you take a look at my channel back, I think just one or two recorded videos ago, part of this is I had a familiarity with the Sony cameras because I had been shooting them primarily for many years. And so I knew how to use them quickly, but I didn't know how to use the Canon cameras quickly. And when I picked up a Canon camera and tried to use it quickly, I was using it like what my primary experience had taught me with Sony cameras. And they're different enough, the Sony and the Canon cameras, that um, you have to use them a little bit differently. And this is something that only experience with the two platforms is really going to show you. So things like the Canons do not recover highlights as well as the Sonys do. And this is something that I think has a lot to do with the robustness of the raw file that each camera writes. And the difference of that is, so like the A1's a 50 megapixel sensor, the R5 and R5C are 45 megapixel sensors. But the A1, even though it's a very similar resolution, the file sizes for the uncompressed RAWs are about twice as heavy. They're about 2 megabytes per megapixel versus the Canons are about 1 megabyte per megapixel. And I think that does decrease the latitude a little bit in the highlights. So what do you do? Well, with the Canons, I shoot a little bit under, doing like the single exposure, aperture priority, like the exteriors of homes and such. I will shoot a little bit more under on the Canon and sandbag it a little bit. And that means I'm less likely to blow the sky, taken that the metering is similar, right? Kind of an evaluative metering based on averages, not based on highlights. But the Sony metering is a little bit better, and the Sony file is a little bit better. Now, what the Canon has over the Sony is it has cleaner shadows. So I can bump up those shadows in post, and I don't get all the chroma noise like I do on Sony's. And so it's just different. That's the thing. So it took me a while to really realize that and how different they were, and then how to work as quickly with the Canon cameras. I can work almost as quickly with the Canon cameras now as I did the Sonys. The Sonys still are faster working, and the files are more robust. With the Canon cameras, I like the color science better, and I know that's another divisive thing. Yes, it matters, of course it does. I like the colors better on the Canon cameras, and I like the lenses better in the RF lenses for really just about every reason that you could think of that you would like a lens, except for size and cost. They are big and expensive lenses compared to the Sonys. So yeah, no, but I agree, man. The red with Canon and Canon lenses, and that's great. Let me look at some of the other comments that are left on the channel here. Okay, I should do another because I have a new crop of cameras now than when I last did like the studio shot with the different cameras and say, hey, try to guess which one this one is when I was trying to grade them the same. So I last did the R5C, the A74, the Red Komodo, and the Blackmagic Pocket 6K. So I do have a little bit of a gear change since last time I was on. I no longer have a pair of Canon R5Cs that I'm using on the daily. So I made a trade with a friend of mine, fellow creator, and I have on the way now a Canon R3. So he and I traded one of my R5Cs for his R3, and there was another lens in the deal and some cash. It's just part of some bigger trade deal that I did with him. So the R3 is on the way to me right now. The R5C is on the way to him. So I'm going to make some content about the R3 versus the R5C for real estate. and for video, and here's the thing, like the R5Cs were working fine for me. The R3 was probably working fine for him, but he and I are both camera nerds, and in order to keep me from spending $10,000 on the red Komodo-X because I really want to because I like red Komodo-X, I'm like, you know what? Let me tinker with an R3. He wanted an R5C. Let's figure something out. And so it'll give me something new to tinker with and make some content around. And if I do miss the other R5C, then then I'll do that instead. And I'll get one of those. Okay, let's see. Scotty V, shoot under for sure. Never had an issue. Yeah, so I usually shoot under by one stop on this. So if I have the evaluative metering on the Sony or on the Canon, it's called something else on the Sony, but what essentially is evaluative metering on both bodies, and I am an aperture priority, 100 ISO, and I am using my exposure compensation dial on the back of the camera to shoot under, which means it's modifying shutter speed, right? If I shoot one stop under with the Sonys, pretty much any of the Sonys, this was like this on the Alpha 1, on the A74, and the A7R5. If I shoot one stop under, I'm not going to blow a sky, even if there is a big difference between the shadows and the highlights in whatever shot. And so if I'm under a tree and then I have nuclear light blowing on the wall of the side of a house kind of thing, and I shoot one under, the Sony metering, along with the Sony robustness of the file, will still make it so I do not blow that wall and I do not blow that sky. I can recover that in post. However, the Canon, that's not always true. So I usually go between 1 and 2 stops under for that single exposure stuff with the evaluative metering. And I mean, great, this is run and gun type of stuff, And so when I've said this before in the channel, I've had guys come and say, well, I take, look at the histogram and then the different channels on the histogram. It's like, no, but you know what? I'm blowing through these things, right? So I'm shooting a house inside, outside, everything in an hour, drone, aerial in an hour, and then going to the next one. So this isn't precision work. This is figuring out something that is going to get you close enough that you can then tweak it in the edit very quickly and not lose information, right? And still make a beautiful deliverable image to your client out of it. So this is the best way that I've found it for that kind of workflow, right? To use the Canon cameras as fast as the Sony cameras is where the Sony cameras I was shooting one stop under. With the Canon cameras, I go between 1 and 2 stops under, depending on what it is. Now the Canons, having said that, okay, the Canons they just behave a little bit differently too. So the Canons are more susceptible, even in the evaluative exposure metering modes, to meter off of the focus point. So if you have like a small point, so with the Canons, I typically shoot single exposure or single point AF, so I'm not doing like a servo, I'm not doing tracking because it's not as sticky as the Sonys that I've used, not as sticky as the A1, the A74, etc. So I'm shooting the the single AF, not the servo mode. Now wherever that box is, if it is kind of more toward highlights, even though it's evaluative, it still gives a weight more around the box. So maybe I'll change my technique at some point, but they're just different. The systems are different. I have to sandbag the Canon a little bit more than the Sony in that regard. Hey, Carlos, I heard the R3 is a great I've heard the same, so I'll let you know whether that's the case or not. The thing that has kept me out of the R3 to this point is pretty obvious. It's a 24 megapixel camera, and that, in my opinion, was really a big miss by Canon. And it wouldn't have been a big miss. And I know the rebuttal to that, right? The rebuttal to that is, especially for what I'm doing for real estate. So what are you talking about? The MLS compresses them down to nothing, and you can't tell this. I get all that, okay, but it matters. It matters even for real estate. And I'll tell you the number one shot that it matters for real estate is the front elevation of the home. So if you're like me and you stopped growing at 5'8" tall, when you have the front of a home and you have the camera up to your eye, you are closer to the ground than you are to the top of that house, especially if it's a 2-story house. And so you either are going to have a sea of pavement in your picture leading up to the bottom of the house and then barely any sky, or you can use a tilt shift lens, which kind of goes against the run and gun, fast paced kind of stuff. I do use tilt shift lenses for twilight shots because I have a bit more time to frame up my shot as I'm waiting for the light to get to what it's going to be. So you're either going to have a sea of pavement, or you back up, you shoot wide, and then you crop the bottom up. That's what I typically do. Is I will back up, I'll shoot it wide, so I still have sky, and then I will crop the bottom up and faux myself some elevation, put that house more toward the center of the frame, so I have equal parts or thereabouts pavement and sky with the house in the middle of the frame. Um, and if you do that and you're only shooting like a 24 megapixel camera to begin with, you're starting to maybe run out of some resolution. Now, I don't know if this is going to be problematic with the R3 or not, but I'm going to find out. And when I find out, I'm going to share what I found. R3 seems like a fantastic camera in all kinds of ways. It's a low light beast. It shoots 6K raw video. It's got an awesome body with the built-in grip. See, I run battery grips on all my stills cameras anyway. Right with my R5Cs and my A1s, I always have a battery grip on it because it fits better in my hand like that, and I don't have to worry about running out of battery capacity. So the R3, I've actually handled it before. Never shot one, but I've handled it before and kind of played with it a little bit in a shop. And it's really solid. It's smaller than you would think. So it seems, I've seen online where people will like put them side by side with like an R5 with a battery grip, and the R30 and the R5C and the R5 are about the same. It seems smaller, maybe because it's just one piece and it's really light too. So it's really a nice body. It apparently has really great ergonomics on board, and so I'm looking forward to checking it out. And I'll see what I do with it. Maybe I'll do this kind of thing. Maybe I'll do streaming content with it. Maybe I'll use it shooting at 6K raw and then interpreting that as C-Log 2. And I'll see what the dynamic range is like, what the highlight roll off is like compared to the R5C shooting its 8K 60 raw and interpreting it as C-Log 2. So, I play around with it. It keeps me out of buying a Komodo-X. And Carlos, of course, your next comment is the Komodo-X is absolutely worth it. I have no doubt about that. I just, you know, we recently bought my wife a new car. Um, and I don't know how long it's been since any of you have bought new cars, but this was a $53,000 car. It's a Toyota. It's a nice Toyota, but it's a $53,000 car. And that's just what they cost now, man. You know, so it's like, okay, doing a trade like I did keeps me out of spending $10,000 on a camera right now because my wife might kill me, if I did that. Um, keeps me out of spending $10,000 on a camera right now because I could trade something I already had for it. And the R5C had two of them, so. Okay, let's see. I see your next comment too, Scotty. Typos above your head. Hey, Carlos, why do you tilt the LCD down and hold the camera above your head? I'm over 6 foot and I do that. Why don't you tilt the LCD down and hold the camera above your head? I'm over 6 foot and I do that for shots. Did I miss what you guys are talking about? Why don't you tilt the LCD down and hold the camera above your head? Scotty, are you talking about the Komodo? And the monitor that you put on top of the Komodo versus like putting it on an arm or something, or are we still talking about mirrorless cameras here? But as long as you bring this up, I do that. I don't do it a ton. Put the LCD down and then hold the camera up like that. So the tripod that I use on a daily basis is by Pro Media Gear, and it gets taller than me. So I like that I have a geared head on it, and I can level it real nice, and then just with the center column, put it up like that. That way I don't have to do the whole, that thing and try to, and try to make that work. So let me see. While you guys are figuring that out, let me get to one of the other comments here. Okay, so this is on my 5 things the Canon R5 Mark II needs to have. And that's a fun topic to talk about too, the R5 Mark II, what it may or may not have. This is from John Cox 5839. Says, I feel like you're the only YouTuber that has challenged himself to master the R5C. I don't. Thank you, John. I don't think that's true. I think there's plenty of great R5C content out there. There's a few out there, but your content is still relevant. I think since the price drop of the price drop and the R5 II seems to keep getting pushed. I don't know if that's necessarily true. I think everybody's just kind of spitballing it now, and I don't know if it's. I mean, it could be well within Canon's time frame of. I don't think they've said anything about it other than just. I think Canon has confirmed that it exists, or that at least the project of it being developed exists. And that was many, many months ago, I think. I think you may have a niche that can catapult you, as there isn't much support for R5C currently. And I know there's a hungry audience like me for new content for this camera. Really excited about the CF Express to NVMe by ICDoc. I haven't heard of that. But I do have the CF Express, or I'm sorry, CFast 2 to SSD dock that I use for the C200s, like I have right here, and I do like that, using it like that, because it's easy just to take it over and edit right off of those drives afterwards. I think this is huge to unlock cheap, fast memory storage for the R5C, making the battery life the only drawback for the R5C. Paying $300 for 4 TB would be nice. I don't. Well, I mean, I've got a couple thoughts on that, and I think, especially Carlos, I think you would agree with this too. Um, I don't like. Okay, so I just said that I use SSD recording on the C200, like I'm doing right now. I'm not recording this, but when I do the YouTube stuff and I use my pair of C200s, that's the way I'll do it. Is I have a dummy CFast card that transfers the data to an SSD that is on top of the camera. I would not shoot client work like that, because it has a dummy card that's built by whoever, some Amazon, Chinese, whatever. It's got a cable that's clamped in the door of the thing, and then going to a dock that has other parts of failure, and so it's when these companies develop these systems, and you can go back, and the prime example of this is Red with the mini mags, right? And anybody who's ever had Red, just the mini mags are just. I bought one once. I bought a 960 gigabyte Red mini mag for my Dragon X that I had at the time for $1,850 used for 960 gigs, because the new price on those was like 2,700 or something like that. They are insanely expensive. And why are they that expensive? Well, some of it is the red tax, right? It's a proprietary thing. And then some of it is, I have never heard anybody who has ever had a media failure with Red Minimax. It just doesn't happen. For whatever they did and whatever the parts inside of it are or are not, they made sure that every single one of them that left the door is not going to fail, because these cameras get used on big productions and such. And so, paying a couple $1,000s for media is nothing compared to like shutting down downtown whatever. So you can have, explosions going, and and thousands of extras walking around and whatnot. I mean, that's costing you a pile of money, right? So um so my point is, I kind of disagree on the cheap storage by way of the transferring it to an NVMe from the dock, or even really a cable off a USB-C. And I know like the Blackmagic cameras do this, and I've had a Pocket 6K that did this. You can USB-C it to a drive right there, and I had like the one that everybody gets, like the T5 or T7 or whatever it was, and it worked. But when I shot for paying clients, I was shooting a CFast in the thing. It's just a better way to go. It's more secure. The cable ain't going to get yanked out. And then so with the R5C and the newer crop of cameras coming out, and I think a lot of the manufacturers like this too. Um, the CF Express Type B media is really not that expensive. It really isn't. Like the older CFast 2, like my C200s use, and like the OG Red Komodo uses. Uh, those cost more. Those cost more than the CF, and they're slower. They're slower, they have lesser capacities, and they cost more. So it's just like anything else. The CF Express stuff is better. It's faster, it's cheaper, and all that. So that's cool. I'm gonna get with those. Carlos, like using an arm to help me get the horizon level. Oh, I like using an arm to help me get the horizon level. Yeah, so I run bubble levels on like most of my cameras. So here, let me go get it real quick and I'll show you on my R5C here. Okay, so on my stills cameras, so there's a couple things that I'll always run on stills cameras, and the first is a cage, and I'll always put a cage on it because I have not only the plate on the bottom, so the ARCA plate on the bottom of the cage, but I'll have an ARCA plate on the side of it as well. So I can put it on the tripod and do vertical things. And I found that a cage is just a better way to do that than an L bracket, especially if you have a battery grip on it too. And the second thing I have is a bubble level right here. And I found these on like B&H. They're by Mighty Works, and they're made of stainless. And it is just a super handy bubble level to have on top of the camera like that. And so I use that in combination with the built-in level on the camera LCD, and then also on my geared tripod head, the Arca Swiss D4. It's got a level right there and right there. So with all of that, I can get it up at elevation and still be able to adjust it. So because if I can't see that one, I can see that one. If I can't see that one, I can see that one. Right. So I know that might be a little excessive for some, but I don't know. It's doesn't cost me anything to do it like that, other than cage, cheap cage, and a couple levels and stuff. So that's what I do. Okay, Hobo Shogun. I think you can get an R5 with a battery grip for around 3,600 right now. I think it's less than that. I think it's like 3,000, 30. But you're right though. They're hugely cheap right now. I think, yeah. So I think what it is the R5 right now. If you buy it for 3,300 maybe on B&H, they throw in the battery grip for you, and that's the R5 is a powerful, powerful camera. I mean, it's really it holds up even to newer, um, even flagship cameras. It really does. So, King Truck, hey, good to see you, bud. It's been a while. R5C seems like nice cam, but everyone is upgrading or trading up. Uh, you know, it is such a consumerist thing now within the camera space, but kind of the way that so it obviously depends on what you're trying to do with these cameras. But and I'll give a good example um, with what I'm shooting on now, the C200. I have a pair of them, and I bought a pair of them just this year. Just this year when they dropped in price, you can get this camera for $2,500 brand new now, the C200b at B&H. And I bought a pair of them for 2,500 bucks a piece. And why did I buy a pair of them? Well, because it's great. It's fantastic for what I'm doing right here, as well as other types of, commercial video work and such. It's great for that. It has a face only autofocus. It has a 12-bit 4K RAW that it shoots. It has SDI and HDMI out. Um, it has full-size XLRs with decent preamps coming into it. It has built-in ND filters. I mean, it is a lot of camera for $2,500. The C200 is. at its current price. Now, this camera came out in 2017, I think. It's a 6-year-old camera. And so why would I buy that now? And making the parallel to the R5C, it's like, what does the C300 Mark III, what would it give me for this, what I'm doing right here, that this camera would not? It'll give me a bit more dynamic range. I don't care about that right here. It would give me an RF lens mount. There's something to that, but I have EF glass, and this is fine. When I'm shooting commercial stuff and I have like piece to camera talking heads and things like that, I like the softer glass to do that kind of stuff. I don't want to see every zit that somebody's ever had. So, a lot with the R5C, I think, to answer your question, or maybe it's not a question, it's an observation, but everyone is upgrading or trading up. I don't understand that behavior. And maybe it's because in my old age, I'm more pragmatic than I used to be. But I'm the guy over here seeing like 6-year-old C200s that were, what are they, like 8,000, 9,000 when they were new, whatever, dropped to like 2,500, going, yo, it's like I could use a pair of them. I could use a pair of them, and still, for a pair of these, I picked it up less than like one C70, right? And for what I'm using them for this kind of thing, it makes zero difference. In fact, I think the C200 is a better platform for this because it has SDI and HDMI out simultaneously. So right now I've got a confidence monitor up here that I'm running SDI out, and it has the overlays on it so I can see all my settings and everything. And then the HDMI is going to my Camelink 4K into my laptop to stream clean off of. You can't do that with a C70. You can't do that with a R5C because it only has one output. So built-in NDs, full-size XLRs. I mean, so this is a 6-year-old camera, and it works wonderfully for what I'm doing. And that's the same kind of thing with the R5C. Like, why is everybody jumping ship? I don't know. I mean, maybe it's the battery thing, but you're not gonna, with an LPE6 battery in an R5 or an R7 or any other R camera you want to talk about, you're not going to be able to get that much time on that battery anyway. So you're never going to be able to compare an R5C battery to like a V mount slung on the back of a Cinema Series camera or something like that. It's just not the same thing. It's a little tiny battery. It's made for stills cameras. So R5C is an incredibly powerful tool. And on my last recorded video that I made the assertion that as far as a true hybrid camera goes, and I've had a lot of them in the past few years from a lot of different manufacturers, a lot of them from a couple manufacturers anyway. I don't think there are any cameras out there that are more powerful than the R5C at its true limits of capability. This is a 45 megapixel stills camera that shoots 8K 60 RAW. There is no other camera that does that. So the Z9 would maybe be the closest, and it has its own set of things. So I don't know why everybody's jumping ship, but it's got to be because something newer and shinier, or they figure they'd rather have a C70. I'd rather have the R5C because I shoot stills as well. So to me, it's a beautiful camera. With all the firmware updates to their cameras like the C70, Carlos says, and R5C, it basically makes them new cameras. Yeah, and that's something that Canon really does well. And so over in the Sony camp, so I'm coming from the Sony camp. I had an A1. It was my daily driver for a couple years. And I mean, they're passing out torches and pitchforks at this point because they are pissed off that the A74 and that some of these other newer Sony bodies coming out get like the lens breathing compensation and some of these other things. But like the way that I have always looked at it, I buy a camera for what it does today. I don't buy a camera for what it may or may not do in the future if I'm lucky. And Sony, Canon, any of these manufacturers, they don't owe me anything. I bought the camera based on what it does now. Now, if the camera works in good faith, doing all of the things that it was said to do when I decided to purchase it, we're square. Would it be great to have updates? Yeah, and I think Canon is certainly a lot better than that than any other company I've seen, except for maybe Red and Blackmagic. Red and Blackmagic are both really good at that too. They have really usable, good updates. Both those companies do, and Canon's right there with them. So you buy a Canon camera, and yeah, they're going to cripple the hell out of it to protect their higher end cameras, but then they have really useful firmware updates. Sometimes they break your camera. So I'm not a beta tester. I'm still on the I call it the Netflix firmware on the R5C. It's I think only one firmware back, but um, I use these day in day out for client work, and so I value stability over what I do feature set, unless it's something that I really want to have. Right. So the Netflix firmware update allegedly softened the highlight roll off in XFAVC. And okay, I wanted that, and so I did that one. But the new firmware update is like, yeah, you switch from photo to video, it's a couple seconds less. And some of the cine lenses transmit information. I was like, I don't need that. I don't want to rock the boat here for stuff that I don't need. King Croc, look forward to your thoughts on the R3. Even Jared likes it. Oh, really? I haven't heard that Jared likes it. it's it's such a weird camera, man. It's one of those things where I had looked at the R5 or the R3 rather, and had it in my cart at B&H at least a few times, but it's the 24 megapixels that always kept me from pulling the trigger on it and buying it. I just don't think there's a place in the world in 2023 for a $5,000 plus stills focused camera to be shooting 24 megapixels. I just don't. And the example that I gave earlier about the front elevation of a home and me cropping up the street to make the sky and the pavement kind of represent an equal value within the frame, and losing the resolution that you lose when you do something like that, that's a pretty good example. And I know that people who shoot what that camera was intended for, so people who shoot sports, people who shoot wildlife, they do a lot of cropping too. And with them, it's because of the distance thing, right? Their lens only goes so long, and whatever they're photographing is beyond that. So they crop in. And in that regard, the R5 variant cameras are better because you can crop a lot more. They're higher resolution. The R3 seems to be an effort from Canon to get all of the old guy sports shooters who are slinging a pair of 1D whatevers with big EF glass over into the mirrorless system to sell them expensive RF glass, right? The 400s, the 600s, etc. The ones that are like 10 grand a piece. That's what, and so how do we do that? Well, got to make it really fast. And the tech probably wasn't there like it was with Sony. Um, for a stacked 50 megapixel sensor. And that's really the other problem with the R3 is that the Sony A1 exists. The R3 is from a time where the competition was the A9 with its 24 megapixels. And everybody's saying, oh, yeah, that's enough, because I shoot a bazillion shots on the sideline, and you know, FTP transferring out, and I don't want to call over the, in the data and this, but look, you got 5G cell networks now that will throughput any information that you want. And now that people are used to having the 50 megapixel A1, the 45 megapixel Z9, I think the R3 really lacks in resolution, regardless of anything else it does. That was the big miss by Canon. So for the way that I use it, yeah, we'll see. You know, um, I think it'll be a great camera. So if nothing else, I can make some content about it versus the R5C, and then send it on its way if I don't like it. But I think I'm going to like it. I think it's pretty awesome. So we'll see. We need a 6-month vid review on the C200. Okay, yeah, I'd be happy to do that. So the C200 is, like I was saying before, it's great for this kind of stuff. It falters it falters in some ways too, in some strange ways. Some strange, I mean, just ways that like things you expect cameras to do now that it doesn't do. Like some of the codecs and frame rates that it can output from some of these outputs. It doesn't have a 10-bit codec. It has an 8-bit codec, and it has a 12-bit RAW. And so either you're got this puny little thing that may or may not look all that great, or you have to deal with mostly uncompressed 12-bit 4K RAW that if you have an older system, the Canon RAW codecs are awful compared to like the R3D and the B RAW, right? I mean, just whatever computer you have, it doesn't really matter. They're just not very good. They're not. They just suck. They suck to work with, So yeah, there are pros and cons. I'd be happy to do that. And so I like the cameras. I think they have a great image, and I think they do everything I need them to do. So I don't have any desire to get rid of them at this point. I think they're working right along with what I want to do. Raw compression is 3-to-1, which is way more robust than the C500 Mark II. Which camera are we talking about, Carlos? Are we talking about the R5C? Raw compression is 3-to-1, or are we talking about the Komodo-X? Let me see. What did you say last? Firmware updates their cameras like the C70 R5C basically makes them new cameras. That's probably what you're talking about. Raw compression, 3-to-1, make it robust. You're okay, yeah. So the C70 and the R5C more robust than the C500 Mark II. That's an interesting take. I mean, the C500 Mark II is still attractive to me because it's full frame in 6K. And I can't wait for Canon to give us a full frame DGO sensor. And I know that you're with me on that. We've had that conversation before, you and I have. If Canon made a full frame DGO camera, I'd buy a pair of them and not look back, and I really would, because that's kind of like a holy grail, you know. King Kruk, my upgrade goal is to become a combination of Deacons and Carlos. I'm sure he's flattered. Do I have any room in there? What was I seeing with Deacons recently? Oh, I saw something recently, but it's a whole thing. You could go on for like a day about Roger Deakins, right? So I think he's a very special guy. Scotty V, I'm really happy with the C70 and R5C. I would be too. It's a great combination. Covers pretty much all I need, but I want to see the box style Canon that we've all seen the patent images online. Very cool, big potential. I haven't seen the patent images, but like I said, I'm somebody who usually doesn't care about that stuff too much. I'm rocking the 7-year-old, 6-year-old, whatever they are, C200s, right? So, um, yeah, for me, it's like I said, it's just I'm more pragmatic now than I once was. I get less enamored by the flashing lights, and more just what can I practically accomplish the mission with here. And part of that too, Scotty, is it depends on who your clients are. If you have red Komodo-X type of clients, then you get a red Komodo-X. Um, most of my clients, they may be able to tell you that this looks better than that, but if they can't articulate why, then I don't need to give them that, because they're only going to be able to tell me this looks better than that if they see both of them, and they still can't tell me why they think that. So I don't need it for that. I would like it just because, like, we're all geeks. Like, we're all the ones that pixel peep. We're all the ones that like with the C200 image, and that light bulb that's back there. You say, oh man, if it was a C70, it's kind of like, oh, like 2 more stops, a latitude in the high. To normal people that don't matter. So I've been trying to be more cognizant of that, with my buying decisions and being a responsible business owner, being a responsible husband, father, and not just going out and blowing all my money on cameras. But it's tempting. It really is. Like, a camera like the Komodo-X, it's like I could get behind a camera like the Komodo-X. And Carlos will tell you. Also, private 5G networks that are blazing fast at live events like stadiums for those who are working and need to stream the work. Exactly. And so we're talking about the lack of resolution on the R3 and why it just doesn't matter anymore. So the the photographers who are on the sidelines shooting Alpha Ones, their work's getting out just as fast as the R3 guys are. Um, and they're able to publish those just as quickly, through their team and everything than the R3. So there's really not a reason, for there to be 24 megapixel resolution. There really isn't. It is good at high ISO, but the A1's pretty good at high ISO as well. The R5 and the R5C, they're pretty clean. And any kind of ISO that, I mean, unless you're really, really stretching it, if you're shooting, I could see like wedding ceremony receptions in the dark. You're shooting indoor, like basketball or something like that. Okay, pretty high ISOs there, but yeah, man, I don't know. C200. Oh, you're talking about the 3-to-1 compression on the C200. I don't know. I mean, it's the raw in the C200 is beautiful. It really is. It's a bear to work with in post, but I have a pretty good system where I'll have the SSD drive, on top, and then have the dummy card go into it, and then I have so I have two C200s, right? I've got this one, then I've got that one right there that I'm not using. So I have two angles on my recorded YouTube stuff when I'm using them, and I have the same system with both of them where I'll have a dummy card going to the 2.5-inch SSD drives. And then I have a dual 2.5-inch Thunderbolt caddy that I will put them in, just insert them into that. And my system is powerful enough that I can edit in real time the raw files just on my two cameras. I don't keep them after that. I don't keep the raw files. It's for YouTube content. Why? Right. So I'll go ahead and do the edit and upload it and just format the drives whenever, after it's all done. It works. It's my system. King Krut Gaming. I have a feeling when the R1 comes up for pre-order, you'll go for the new and shiny cam. I might, because there are some. See, but I won't do it though. But I won't do it because it's new and shiny. I'll do it because I'll do it. I'll do it if it fixes a couple very specific things with the R5 and the R5C. I'll do it if my flash sync speed can be faster than 1/250th. I'll do it if it comes along with a higher resolution um, app to tether with and control with. So they're very specific. Like if it doesn't do those things, and I could probably think of a couple more, but not a lot. And they're very esoteric things too. Like I don't care about how fast the frame rates are. I don't care, so I mean, if it doesn't do those specific things, then I probably will not. So we'll see. I won't get it just because it's newer and shinier, but I'll get it if it does things that are like pain points to me. Jeremy Deal, what's happening? You're right on with this train of thought. 90% of agents have no clue what they actually want. They only know they want it brighter light. Yeah, I I whittle them down with that. So and you're right, they do. So, but okay, so the two things that drives me crazy that they all want them brighter, and they all go into a house and blow every light just as a matter of course, right? Turn on everything. And it's like, okay, sometimes you have a very clean, modern, white looking house, and then they go and puke a bunch of tungsten all over it, turn on all these lights. I'm like, well, let me shoot this one, with that light off. And and the colors are better and so on and so forth. So those are the two things. And I kind of tease them about this too, because that's just who I am now. Um, you know, I'm me, they'll adjust, right? Um, I said, look, my mission in life is to keep real estate agents from entering a home and blowing every light, just as a matter of course. Now, if there's a purpose to it, then fine. If it's an architectural feature. And so like can lights, can lights that are architectural features, they're built into the home. We want to have those on because then you can see in the photograph that they exist, that they're there. But just blowing every light just because, I try to keep them away from behavior like that. And the brightness thing is one of those too. I have some agents, it's too dark. It's like, it's covered in brown wallpaper. What the hell do you want? And so, and this, Jeremy, I often tell people, real estate photography is, it's a balancing act because you want everything to be a little bit bigger and a little bit brighter than it actually is, but not so much so that you're pissing people off when they walk in the front door because it looked like some gymnasium and it turned out to be a powder room. you know? So, listen, guys, I've been at it for an hour and five. So, thank you so much for those of you who have participated today. Like this video if you would. Just give me that on your way out. I'd appreciate it. Helps the channel grow. Helps bring more content to you. Uh, feel free, please comment below if you're watching this after the fact and let me know if I'm way off base or what you think about all these cameras. I have fun doing this kind of stuff. So I'm gonna start doing it more regularly. My busy season is starting to slow down. Jeremy, I think I would imagine that yours is too. Jeremy Deal, for those of you who don't know, he has a great channel too. You should go check it out. He does what I do. Yeah, he does. He does. He's in North Carolina. He does real estate media like I do here in California. So thank you, Hobo Shogun, King Kruk. Thanks always. Thanks always for coming by. Carlos Quintero, another guy you guys got to check out his channel. He's been making a lot of really great Komodo-X content lately. And Carlos is really great because he is a commercial media creator, right? He's a brand guy. He helps businesses tell their stories through what he does. And so when he does reviews and he uses gear, he's coming at it from that type of position. A very practical, this works, this doesn't, and I'm not just going to tell you, I'm going to show you why. And he shows you why. So everybody should check out his channel too. Okay, Rob Phoenix, great stuff. Well, thanks for coming along, Rob. All right, everybody. I hope you have a great rest of the week. I'll see you.